Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. We have a pretty packed agenda today, so let's get started. I'm just going to give a quick overview of our general rules and things like that before we get started. Good afternoon. I'm Herb Smart. I'm a member of the Technical Advisory Committee, and I'm just going to go over a couple quick things here. We are obviously using the Zoom app here. For those of you who are on a phone line, you could navigate by using *6 to mute and unmute, which we would definitely appreciate if you're not speaking, or mute your phone on its own. You could use *9 to raise or lower your hand on the phone, but for the most part, I'd say like 99% of the people participating in these calls use the Zoom app or the browser for Zoom. So please mute and unmute accordingly. We'd appreciate that. We will have public comment, both on general items on the public comment period of the agenda up front early, and then also on the specific items that we have. So feel free and raise or lower your hand. Use the chat function. I'll attempt to monitor that as best I can, and we'll try to hear everybody in an orderly manner. We're recording the meeting. It's going to get posted on our website when we're done. Once I get it posted, it usually takes around 24 hours to render that. And then we'll have appropriate meeting materials that are presented available on the website. I'm going to have to put them up during the meeting today. I haven't had quite a chance to do that beforehand. And so we'll get those up at turlockgroundwater.org on the meetings event page. So with that being said, I will pass over the microphone. And as they say in maritime circles or in Star Trek, Michael, you have the con.
Thank you, Herb. I was not a Star Trek guy growing up, so because they just split the infinitive on the too bold to go thing. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michael Cook. I'm the chair of the West Turlock Groundwater Sustainability Technical Advisory Committee. It's my job with my co-host Sarah Wolf from the East Turlock GSA Technical Advisory Committee to co-host this meeting. I think right now I'm kind of stalling because the West Turlock is struggling for a quorum. Right now I have Debbie from TID, Karen from City of Ceres, Curtis from Hillmar, Miguel from City of Modesto, Mike Pitcock from Waterford, we have Michelle from Keys CSD, and actually Walton Lacey. So that's actually a quorum, unless somebody tells me otherwise. So at 2:03 p.m. on this Thursday afternoon, I call the meeting of the West Turlock Technical Advisory Committee to order. Over to you, Sarah.
Thank you. Yeah, and I believe we have a quorum also for East Turlock. I showed Dennis Yotsua, Walt Ward, Lacey McBride, and I did not see Matt on there unless I missed him, but we have a quorum with that. So I call it to order at 2:03.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. So the first item on the agenda is public participation. This is the time set aside for members of the public to directly address the Technical Advisory Committee on any item of interest that was within our subject matter jurisdiction. You have 5 minutes. You can either speak generally now or wait until an item comes up later on the agenda. You can speak then if you should choose to do so. So with that, any public participation? I'm not hearing anybody. I'm not seeing any hands raised. So with that, let's go to item number 4. This is an action item for both technical advisory committees. This is the concept of a groundwater sustainability plan manager. This discuss the appointment of a manager for the Turlock Subbasin and make a recommendation to the 2 boards, the West Turlock and East Turlock GSA board, to appoint one. I believe this is a requirement under the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. So with that, can I call on you, Debbie, to talk about that? Or maybe it's me. Anybody? Bueller?
I'm sorry. I was talking away. Nobody could hear me. I have a couple of slides to be able to explain it. So let me pull that up. If I could share my screen. I think it's this one. Oh, wait, this one. There you go. there. It's actually just, can you see this?
It's pulling right up right now, Debbie.
Oh, sorry. Thanks, Herb.
We see it now.
Okay, perfect. So Sigma requires the Department of Water Resources requires through their regulations that the sub-basin designated a plan manager to be the interface between the Department of Water Resources and the sub-basin as they implement the GSP. And so as DWR has questions, as they were reviewing the documents and what have you, they would get back to the plan manager, and then the plan manager would reach out to whomever within the sub-basin is needed to work through whatever questions they may have. So it simplifies the process for the Department of Water Resources in working with the various entities within each sub-basin. And so this includes some of the language within the regulations that describes what this plan manager would do. And so the plan manager is an employee or authorized representative of a GSA or GSAs that's appointed through a coordination agreement or other agreement, who has been designated to manage a designated management authority for submitting the plan and serving as a point of contact between the GSAs and the department. And then the reporting provisions within the regulations say that information required by the Act includes plans, plan amendments, annual reports, and 5-year assessments, and shall be submitted by each GSA and department as follows. And it requires that everything be submitted electronically. And then it requires that the submitted materials be accompanied with a transmittal letter signed by either the plan manager or a duly authorized person. So that gives you an idea of what the plan manager would do, and that it needs to be someone who's authorized to do this. And so the tax should recommend someone to the GSAs, and then the GSAs will need to take affirmative action to give this person the authority to submit the plan and interact with DWR once the plan has been adopted and they have the GSAs have authorized the plan manager to submit it to DWR. So that's what I have. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any questions for Debbie? Again, it sounds like a requirement of the regulation. Again, this is the one point of contact for DWR, so it doesn't get confusing in terms of who they should reach out to. And again, all the documents we submit have to be reviewed and approved by both boards. So there's some fail-safe mechanisms there. Any questions? Do we have anybody interested in volunteering, or anybody want to nominate somebody? Well, I work with Debbie Montalbano as TID's main representative on Sigma issues. She does a lot of work with the consultant team and with DWR, and I think she'd be a good fit for this position if she's interested. But again, I'd be interested to hear what other people think too.
That's a motion, Michael. I'll second it.
Oh, well, this is Karen Morgan. I will also motion for the third.
Okay, I'm not allowed to make a motion. Well, I should make a motion as the chair, so we'll consider that a motion. A second from Karen. So with that, any comments from the East Turlock folks? Is that a concern that we have a West Turlock person as the manager, or any other thoughts?
I don't believe we have any concerns with that. Anyone on the East Turlock? Jack, any concerns?
No concerns for me.
Okay, so for the West Turlock folks, we obviously put the vote separately because we are two separate GSAs. So with that, I have a motion from Curtis and Hilmar and a second from Karen from Sirius to appoint or recommend the appointment of Debbie Montalbano to this position. Again, this will be taken up by our board, so this is just a recommendation by our boards. So with that motion, a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed on the West Turlock? Okay, sounds not, so it's approved unanimously, and then I'll hand over to Sarah for a vote for the East Turlock folks.
So we'd be looking for the same motion to nominate or recommend Debbie to the management. Let me use the correct term, plan manager for the Turlock Subbasin. Can I get a first and a second?
Yeah, so moved, Walt.
A second? Thank you. I'll do a roll call vote. Walt Ward. Walt, do you vote in favor?
Yes.
Thank you. Lacey McBride.
Yes.
Dennis Yatsua
Yes.
and Matt Beeman
Yes.
and Sarah Wolf. Yes. It passes in East Turlock.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. So moving on to item number 5, this is to discuss and approve the updates on the draft projects and management actions and implementation support activity chapters. I think this is chapters 8 and 9. And we're having Sarah and Mike from the East Turlock GSA make this presentation. So over to you guys. Thank you. And thanks for doing this. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Mike is going to take the lead on this, and I'm going to be the screen advancer. So I'm assuming you all can see the PowerPoint up on your screens.
Yeah, we can, Sarah. We got it.
Great. So Mike, if you
Yeah.
want to start.
Sure. So just to give a brief intro, what we've done here is we've taken some slides that we borrowed kindly from Ali, from his great slide deck that he put together. Our presentation is going to be a little bit less detailed than his. As I see it, the objective here is just to give an overview of the different components that are in the chapter and how they will work together. And then I think folks can ask questions, and on the call we have a number of folks that are probably the best folks to answer questions about specific projects and management actions and so forth. I may not be the best to answer all of them. So just by way of introduction for members of the public, sustainable yield is basically what we're managing to, and it's defined in the Sigma regulation as the maximum quantity of water calculated over a base period. It's an extended period of both wet and dry periods that can be extracted without causing an undesirable result. So we're managing to these sustainability indicators, which I think if you click again, those will pop up on the bottom of that slide, Sarah.
Well,
Maybe.
possibly.
There
we go.
So the only one not applying is the seawater intrusion, which is a topic I think later in our meeting. So we're managing to all of these sustainability indicators. And next slide. So what this slide indicates is the estimated sustainable yield based on the best information we have available right now is less than what is actually being pumped. And of course, how much is being pumped varies from year to year, as you can see from the different size of those green bars based on the different amount of precipitation that's in the blue bars coming down from the top. And up to the vertical blue line, 2015 is our historical model, and up to years 1 through 50 is our forecast period. And we can see that, the basin, fits the definition of being in a state of overdraft. And as a result of that, Sigma requires that the GSP identify what projects and management actions are going to be implemented to correct that situation over the GSP's first 20-year implementation period. And that's what we're going to discuss today. Next slide. So PMA, so projects and management actions. Projects are the physically constructed features. They're the capital projects, whereas management actions are more administrative, or things that you require. They're non-structural programs or policies. Both of them can work to bring a basin into compliance with the sustainable yield. So they work together to make progress toward meeting that sustainability goal and the measurable objectives. Doesn't have to be met on day one, but these projects and management actions are implemented over time to, over that 20-year period, meet the interim milestones and get to the measurable objectives so that the basin can be sustainably managed. And also to avoid, because climate is variable, on the way to avoid getting into undesirable results by the water levels falling below minimum thresholds. So our projects are broken up into three groups. The first group is projects that are currently in progress, or their construction is in progress. And so those projects will continue. Group two is projects that are planned and will be implemented. There's a commitment to implement these projects. The details are well known, and it's reasonable to predict the benefits of those projects to the groundwater system. So the group 1 and 2 projects are described and evaluated in a greater detail, and Ali and his group actually modeled them and their potential benefits to get an estimate of what those benefits might be. Group 3 projects have been identified, and they may occur. On the east side, speaking for ourselves, we'll make as many of those happen as possible, but they're just not far enough along in the planning process to where we can, with certainty, predict what the benefits would be, and a lot of the details remain to be worked out. But it's important to recognize that those projects exist, and to, for the GSAs to develop their own procedures for advancing them through the project development process. So these are not developed in detail, but it's important to know that they exist and to work on implementing them to the extent that they're needed. And the group, well, can we go back to the group 1 and 2 projects?
Sorry about that.
So the group 1 and 2 projects fall into, or excuse me, the group 2 projects fall into 3 different categories. The first are the urban projects, which are all within the West Turlock subbasin. And then there are agricultural projects, which are both in the East subbasin and in the West subbasin. And both have significant effects on the sustainable yield and on groundwater levels. So, next slide. So this just shows, and I'm not sure why 14 is in there, but it shows the location of those first 11 group 1 and group 2 projects. And we can see that there's several projects kind of toward the center of the West Turlock subbasin. And those are some of the municipal and agricultural projects. Some of the projects have broader areas, and they're just simply, we've chosen a dot to represent them. And then on the east side, the projects, a lot of them are sort of in the western portion of the east side to maybe the central portion of the east side. Next slide. So this just shows very briefly the effect of the projects on the groundwater budgets. So one of the, and Ali just chimed in that the map that I just showed is an older map, and it's being updated for the final chapter. So thank you for that. So on the left is a baseline water budget with extraction or outflows in the lower, below the line, and then inflows or recharge on the upper side of the line. And then as a result of inflows or outflows being greater or less, that black line that goes from left to right goes up and down. That's the cumulative storage change. And anytime that outflows exceed inflows, that line trends down. Anytime that inflows exceed outflows, the line trends up. And you can see that the baseline, and this was a modeling scenario, shows that over that 50-year implementation horizon, that line dips down below the zero line. So it goes basically into a deficit situation, and that causes groundwater levels, of course, to drop. And groundwater levels are below minimum thresholds in some areas at this point, especially on the east side. There were several different scenarios that were simulated. And I don't have a slide to show those. I'll just tell you what they are. But there were 4 different scenarios that were simulated for the group 1 and 2 projects. And just to kind of get a sense for what happens, what is the effect of the projects on the west side, what is the effect of the urban projects and the agricultural projects, and what's the effect of the agricultural projects on the east side. And then scenario 4 was all the projects together, and I'll show you a slide on that later. And scenario 5 is called the sustainable scenario, because what it does basically, it assesses, if we implement all the group 1 and 2 projects, what is the leftover net deficit? And so it simulates how much deficit needs to be made up, and that's the sustainable scenario. So you can see that in the graph on the right, under the sustainable scenario, that black line does not dip down as far. So why don't you go back to the previous slide, because I just realized I said something wrong. The horizontal line at 0 is not related to that black line at all. That black line is just a cumulative change. And you can see that under the baseline, that cumulative storage change is negative, right? If you were to fit a straight line to it, it would go downward to the right. Whereas under scenario 5, that line would actually trend upward just a little bit over time. All righty, next slide. All right, so these are the different scenarios, and this is where the horizontal line makes a difference. That horizontal red line essentially represents whether or not we go whether or not we go into negative storage or positive storage. And so it compares in a relative sense the different scenarios. I'm going to need to move something out of the way here. The different scenarios in terms of what do they do to correct storage depletion. So you can see the black line on the bottom is the baseline. That's no projects, business as usual. The blue line is with the group 2 projects, and you can see that there's less storage depletion. So there's an increase in groundwater levels and storage. And the green line is the sustainable scenario. So that's making up for that deficit that remains to get to sustainable yield using the group 3 projects as well as demand reduction actions. Next slide. So adaptive management just basically recognizes that what we're going to do is we're going to implement the initial projects in group 1 and group 2. And we're going to implement a monitoring program to see how we're doing. And at the same time, we're not only going to collect monitoring data, but more data in general to address data gaps. And recognizing that there's uncertainties in what we currently know, we're going to update our understanding of the basin, get better tools, and update our understanding as to how effective are these projects really. Until we implement them, we won't fully know. So we'll perform that analysis to reevaluate the performance and benefits and how much shortfall there is. And then we're going to assess the group 3 projects and initiate their planning and implementation. We're going to implement management actions as needed, and then reassess the nature, extent, and timing of demand reduction, and prepare an annual state of the basin report and 5-year GSP updates. What's not shown on here is that you could put from the second to last bullet, you could put an arrow going back up to bullet number 1, which is implement projects. So basically what you're doing is you're implementing projects, you're taking actions, you're collecting data, you're making a course correction going back to the beginning, and this is a repeating cycle to make sure that you get it right, and that incrementally that you get the basin into a sustainable yield situation. Next slide. So the management actions fall into three different categories. The first is demand reduction strategies, and those are basically, voluntary conservation and or land use changes or conservation practices. And those would be, some of them would be programmatic, some of them would be, voluntary. For under number one, it would all be voluntary, but we would establish programs to support these kinds of changes. And so, for example, AWMP or UWMP conservation requirements could be, that style of requirement could be adopted more broadly in a GSA that chooses to, well, there's two GSAs, either one can choose any of these management actions. So if that's chosen, then those types of conservation measures would be expanded. Land fallowing would include things like developing a program that helps to incentivize and helps growers, for example, understand how to implement land fallowing or land use changes in a way that may make more business sense for them. So for example, repurposing land using conservation easements for solar power production, other similar land use changes for which incentive dollars might be available. Conservation practices is just looking at expanding general conservation practices, and there you need to make sure that you consider that you really understand what what the net effect of those conservation practices are. It's not always what it appears to be. So in other words, when you conserve irrigation water, you also change the groundwater balance in terms of what returns to the groundwater. So all those things need to be considered. The pumping management framework actions basically look at, okay, to the extent that that we have to cut back on pumping to meet the sustainable yield, to make up for that deficit once all of the Group 1 and 2 projects are implemented, and as many Group 3 projects as possible, and we implement all the demand reduction strategies that we can, we foresee that in the East Turlock Subbasin that there's still going to be a net deficit. And so speaking for us, these are 4 management actions that would be implemented. The first would be a groundwater extraction and reporting program. Before we can regulate pumping, we need to know how much pumping is being done. And that would start as a voluntary program, and we envision it either expanding as a voluntary program plus remote sensing information, or potentially voluntary plus required metering and reporting. And that choice would be made by the GSA with input from stakeholders in terms of what's the best way for us to regulate ourselves. Action number 4, groundwater allocation and pumping management program. That basically divides the groundwater pumping into 3 different categories. The first category is what pumping that on a particular parcel or in a particular GSA falls within the sustainable yield. The second one is unsustainable pumping, and that is pumping that's above the sustainable yield. And the third would be carryover pumping, so recognizing that not all years are created equal, and in some years more water is needed by a particular operator than in others. It allows carryover pumping that's made up in either previous or subsequent years. And then a fourth category may be pumping credits. So for example, if an operator is able to implement some recharge practices on their property, that under that kind of program, they could get credit for being able to pump more water. The fifth program would be a groundwater extraction fee. That would be assessed if it's adopted on unsustainable pumping. and then used to fund projects that benefit that area. The sixth action is a groundwater pumping credit market and trading program, and that provides additional flexibility on top of the carryover pumping, so that you have operational flexibility to get water when you need it, but you'd have to trade for it or pay for it on an open market. And by the same token, if you decided that you didn't need all of your water allocation, then you could sell that on the open market or trade it. The last management action is a domestic well mitigation program. And that's important because domestic wells oftentimes are the most vulnerable to being affected by groundwater level declines. And also disadvantaged communities or disadvantaged areas tend to rely more on individual domestic wells than on community water systems. So they become a vulnerable population. And there are a number of existing programs that are actively looking at this, so we would coordinate with those programs. And then we have a tiered action framework that would be developed that first looks at understanding whether or not domestic well effects or reported issues are they related to sustainable groundwater management, or are they related to the condition of the wells, or how they're being operated, and then allowing for a mitigation program if it's related to sustainable groundwater management. Next slide. So this pumping management framework, just to kind of recap, there's these 4 management actions that work together, and I've gone through them in some detail already. So you can see there's a couple of slides coming up where you can see how these would actually work. Next slide. Oh, domestic well mitigation program. Should have waited for this slide, but I already gave you the verbal. So coordinate with existing. We would assess the need for a well registration program for domestic wells. Those can be difficult to implement, so we would look at that and see what the benefit would be and whether or not it could be effectively implemented. There's already some programs under the nitrate control program that are identifying those wells, so that's where the coordination comes in part. And we would share information and monitor areas of domestic well information gaps. We do have some areas that we know are more concerned for domestic wells, and we want to expand our monitoring program in those areas, and there's plans to do that are referenced in this chapter and in chapter 7. And then we would target projects in areas of potentially vulnerable wells. Some of the existing projects are in areas where there'd be relatively broad groundwater level recovery forecast, and we know that there's surrounding areas with domestic wells. And then I talked about the 3-tiered corrective action plan. Next slide. Adaptive management. Yeah, I guess the way I would put it is what we don't know is as important as what we do know. And sometimes if you don't pay attention to it, it can suddenly become much more important. So since uncertainty will always be present, we have to base our decisions on good monitoring data to determine what steps and corrective actions are needed. So, and we know we'll implement the group 2 projects. What the adaptive management will tell us is how far will those get us? How many group 3 projects do we need? You know, how hard do we need to push on those? The pumping management framework, how much of it needs to be made up for by pumping reductions, and how much of it can be captured with demand reduction strategies. So next slide. So this graph shows how the adaptive management of pumping reduction or demand management would work with group 1 and 2 projects being implemented. So the blue bars on the bottom represent the long-term average sustainable yield. Okay, so that's a number that we estimate. That number may change from year to year, but we're interested in the long-term average. And that number may change as we gather more information. But conceptually, that's the number that's the volume of water that we want to manage to. The red bars represent the unsustainable pumping. And again, these are long-term averages, so this is just shown conceptually. But currently, you know, the estimate is that we're somewhere on the order of 39% over the sustainable yield of the basin. It could be less than that, could be more than that, but that's our best estimate at this point. So that's where we are now. So that's what's shown in 2022, 2023. And then we're assuming that we start to see project implementation a couple of years into plan implementation, and that by 5 years in, we're seeing that project yield pretty well developed. And that's those blue horizontally striped bars that overlie the red bars. And then what you start seeing in year 5 is implementing demand reduction. So this is pumping management. And pumping management is phased in 4 phases. The first phase is the first 5 years. We want to gather more information. We want to understand how the basin is responding to project implementation. And then by the end of that 5-year period, we want to develop a pumping management plan and adopt it and begin implementing it during the second 5-year period. Now, a GSA may choose to implement pumping reduction during that first 5-year period, but the plan is that by the second 5-year period, if it's necessary in a GSA, you're going to have a plan in place by year 5 and included in your GSP update. And then you see that pumping management, the pumping reduction is being phased in over time. And both the projects and that pumping reduction is pushing down the red bar and making it skinnier and phasing it out. So by the next 5 years of implementation, we have a better idea of how this works. We update and finalize our plan with a target toward completely phasing out the unsustainable pumping by the end of that third 5-year period. And that's what you see there. At each 5-year period, we look at what data we've gathered, we make new forecasts, and we assess how did we comply with the interim milestones that we set for sustainable management. And that will tell us what to do for the next 5-year period. Next slide. So this is a what-if scenario. We don't know how effective the group 1 and 2 projects are going to be, and we don't know how many group 3 projects we can add and what their yield would be. Okay, so this shows if we get twice the yield that we modeled for the group 1 and 2 projects out of group 1, 2, and 3 projects, this is what it would look like. And what you see essentially is that those red bars get phased out and get skinnier much more quickly. And the top red stripe bars of pumping reduction, those bars decrease in magnitude. So this just shows you that the more projects you can implement, the less pumping reduction you have to do, and the more quickly the basin comes into sustainability. Now, those horizontally striped red bars and blue bars both cost money. And so one of the things that a GSA needs to look at is how do you balance best between them? At a certain point, maybe pumping reduction is more attractive than projects. We'd like to think there's a lot of projects that can be implemented before that occurs. Next slide. So this shows a couple of different concepts, and it shows them conceptually. This is not meant to be like a real forecast. So this just basically shows that during certain years, your sustainable pumping, the blue pumping at a particular location, you might exceed that, and that's the pale blue bar that's right above it in the first 2 left-hand most bars. That's your carryover pumping. And the green vertically striped bars are your makeup. So basically what you would be doing is you would be pumping less by that same amount or by some percentage of it in subsequent years or in previous years. Now, a GSA can decide how it wants to define carryover pumping, whether it needs to occur within 1 year, within 2 years. whether you can have credit for 50% carryover or 100% carryover. All those are policy decisions that need to be made, but that's the carryover pumping. The red bars still show the unsustainable pumping, and they show it decreasing over time. And they show, in essence, it's like a cap and trade kind of situation. And you can have trading and market development for sustainable pumping to allow you operational flexibility when you need more water. And then lastly, you can have a fee program on the red pumping that gives you an incentive to pump less unsustainably. And it provides a funding source for projects that is directly tied to unsustainable pumping in certain areas. Next slide. I think that may actually be, oh, here we go. Implementation support activities. So these are just the activities and actions that support implementation. And we have a focus on the first 5 years and estimating the costs of those. That's chapter 9 that is also being released. And there are a couple of placeholders in that chapter to estimate the specific costs of these various different activities, and also to reach an agreement as to water allocation between the West Turlock Subbasin and the East Turlock Subbasin. Because in order to make the previous slides work, you have to have a proper understanding of water allocation and how that's going to work across jurisdictions. The different support activities, these are activities that we felt were related more to implementation. I've seen them referred to as management actions in some cases, but we felt that they were appropriate to parse out as implementation activities, and it's much easier to understand them in that context. You can see them all listed there. I mean, they include things such as, okay, now we're going to implement the monitoring program that we talked about, the reporting program and the outreach, and we're going to do the investigations to address the data gaps. We're going to have our accounting mechanism for water supplies, develop action plans for exceedance of minimum thresholds, develop our data management system, implement our management actions or well registration and management. I'm not going through these systematically. I don't want to read the slide to you, but that's what's in it. And I believe that's the last slide. And with that, I'll go on mute and leave it open for discussion and questions.
Thank you,
Hopefully
Mike.
that was, yeah. Go ahead. I was just going to say, hopefully that was helpful if anyone has any questions.
I was going to say the same thing. So that was
Like Rhett.
well done, Mike. Mike, appreciate that. Kind of the rubber meets the road. Looks like we have a hand up from Rhett Calkins.
Yes, this is Rhett Calkins, and pardon me if my internet is cutting out. I had a little issue earlier, but hopefully I'm coming through. I'm curious if there is a discussion on the amount of pumping that could be done on the West GSA versus the East GSA, considering the West GSA is importing water and paying for projects. Group 1 projects notable, are the surface water treatment plant that the city of Turlock and city of Ceres are paying for, along with a small amount by TID and some cooperation with TID. And then the regulating reservoirs that are going in, one in Ceres and others planned. And that's in addition to the regulating reservoir put in down near the Hillmar area prior. So there's projects and there's imported water, and the west side, TID is always considered conjunctive use as a method of maintaining groundwater. And the east side is reliant on mostly pumping. So is there a discussion? I mean, I hear a lot of discussion about the basin as a whole, but is there a discussion how to treat those that pump on the east and those that pump on the west differently? And this whole idea of trading water back and forth, water credits, and I'm not pumping now, so I've got water banked in the ground for next year. Does that apply equally to the west pumpers and the east pumpers? And it seemed like there's a lot of discussion that could be had. I'm really curious about, and maybe it's been behind the scenes, and maybe there's some tension about how that gets divided up. I'm curious to hear what's going on with all that. Thank you.
Michael, can I take the first crack at that?
Go right ahead. Michael's gonna volunteer you anyway.
Sure. So yes, there has been a lot of discussion. You know, it's real. So, you know, of course, there's tension and there's concern, you know, on all sides. So there's a number of different really good questions in there, Rhett. So let me maybe start by saying that the management actions and the projects are essentially a toolbox, right? And in the case of the projects, those are tools that each GSA brings to bear and puts within their toolbox for their jurisdiction and for the good of the basin. And that's true for the east side as well as for the west side. And the kinds of projects that are possible in east and west, you know, differ in some respects if you look at what the you know, what kinds of projects are being implemented. And in some cases, they're similar, you know, like for in lieu or direct recharge. Each GSA is responsible for regulating and meeting its measurable objectives and sustainable management criteria within its jurisdiction and coordinating with the other GSA to reach the sustainability goal for the basin as a whole. So that's where important discussions need to take place. And, you know, one of them is this notion of water allocation that's being talked about. In terms of pumping reduction, what I hope you heard me say is that the East Turlock Subbasin GSA recognizes that it will need to implement these management actions, and that while we want to implement as many projects as possible, we foresee that we will still have a shortfall that requires pumping reductions to take place. We hope to be able to minimize that. But hope is not a management strategy. So that's, you know, we don't know at this point to what extent the pumping reduction needs to be implemented. So that's why the toolbox that's given to us is an adaptive management strategy. It will be up to the West Turlock Subbasin to decide what of those tools will apply to them. And then lastly, I just wanted to say with respect to trading and water markets, those would be decisions that are made by each GSA, and having markets internal to a GSA versus inter-GSA markets are two entirely different questions. And the only question that we've dealt with thus far is intra-GSA. So, you know, if it was inter-GSA, you know, I think that's perhaps a possibility, but I think there would need to be a lot of discussions about whether or not that's a good thing. And I'm not going to speak to that part. The final thing that I would say is in terms of carryover pumping and markets, those are intended to give people who would be subject to pumping reductions flexibility so that they can live with those hard choices that need to be made. So it's generally been found that with a resource-based question, you know, like cap and trade kind of situation, that if you can bring carryover or credits for recharge actions or for actions that benefit the basin or markets to bear, that it makes implementation and compliance easier.
Okay, thank you, Mike. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Amanda from Leadership Council, you have your hand up. You want to go ahead?
Yes, please. Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Mike, for that presentation. Appreciate it. I did miss I was trying to open my notes document and I missed the slides about which projects are in group 1 and group 2, but I'll be able to, Herb said I'll be able to go look at those later, so that's fine. I had a few questions and comments. And to give a little background, Mike, I don't know if you know who Leadership Council is. We work with, yeah, okay, you know who we are. We work with residents of low-income communities of color most vulnerable to groundwater level decline and drinking water impacts, and work with the community of Delhi in the Turlock Basin. But first, some of these are going to be repeated comments from, I believe, the special board meeting that talked a little bit about these projects. But again, glad to see a drinking water mitigation framework, and we will be eager to provide some feedback on the specifics of that program to make sure that it's most effective to ensure that drinking water is protected for folks that we work with. Next, on the adaptive management strategy, I definitely understand the GSA wanting to prioritize certain projects first and then kind of ease into other ones. We do, however, urge the GSAs to do demand reduction strategies concurrent with recharge projects and other surface water-ish projects at the beginning, because, you know, as you showed, it won't be enough to just do the projects. We will need management actions. And what we're seeing from other GSAs is that they tend to rely very heavily on recharge projects, and meanwhile, folks that we work with and other GSAs their wells keep going dry. And we are also worried that surface water is not guaranteed, especially with climate change. We know that the climate is going to be more variable, unpredictable. We can't just rely on surface water being available. So want to see some good, clear commitments to implementing demand reduction strategies like allocations and encouraging land repurposing, et cetera, from the beginning. And my last comment is regarding groundwater markets. Residents who we work with have really grave concerns about groundwater trading or groundwater markets. First of all, residents that we work with, and generally residents who rely on domestic wells or small community water systems, face huge, if not insurmountable, barriers to participating in groundwater markets, given the technical and financial expertise that it takes to participate in a market. I have heard that we're aware that there's many ideas to include set-asides for drinking water, you know, so folks wouldn't have to actively participate in a market. But even then, residents that we work with are very concerned about localized impacts on their drinking water. For example, if you have a large farm right next to a community, which actually is the case in most of the communities that we work with, that farm could buy a bunch of allocations and be able to pump a lot, potentially impact the communities that we work with. So wanna share those concerns about markets. And we don't work directly with small farmers, but I also am in contact with several folks who work with small farmers, and they're also very concerned about markets potentially wiping out small farmers. So wanted to bring those to your attention. Thanks.
Thank you, Amanda, for those comments. Appreciate that. I don't see any more hands up. Do you have anybody who wants to comment? Looking through the chat, I don't see anything in the chat either. Okay. Any more comments on chapters 8 and 9, project management implementation actions? So with that, we know that we have a joint board meeting coming up on November 15th, and the goal is to recommend that these chapters be moved on to the boards for release to the public. Again, this will be the last chance to look at these, and there may be, you know, future edits based on public input and everything else. But looks like the chapters are good to go right now. and at least in their draft form, get out for public review as we've done with all the other chapters. And so with that, for the West Turlock folks, looking for a motion to approve the updates to the draft projects management actions and the implementation support activities chapters, and recommend they be included in the draft groundwater sustainability plan.
So moved.
Okay,
Curtis.
motion from Curtis and Hilmar. You have a second in West Turlock folks? Don't be shy now. This is your chance for infamy.
Second, Waterford.
Thank you, Mike. So a motion from Curtis, a second from Mike. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Over to you, Sarah, for the East Turlock.
Thank you. So we'd like the East Turlock TAC to also recommend these two chapters to the full board on the 15th. So can I get a motion to that effect?
Walt, move for approval.
Thank you, Walt. A first from Walt. Second.
This is Dennis. I'll second.
Thank you, Dennis. So I have a first from Walt Ward and a second from Dennis Yatsuit, and I'll do a roll call vote. Walt Ward,
Yes.
Dennis,
Yes.
Lacey,
Yes.
Matt,
Yes.
and Sarah. I vote yes. So we have full support for moving these forward to the full board.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. We're down to our last chapter now. So move on to item number 6, the communications and outreach chapter, which I believe is chapter 3. Review and discuss the progress so far, and if we're happy with it, recommending it move ahead also to the joint board meeting for release to the public. So this is Herb. You've waited 3 years to have your own chapter, Herb, and here it is. So don't mess up now. Okay, over to you.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, it's our chapter. We've all been working on this since, honestly, it's a little different of a chapter because we're really documenting the things that have been done, really since even beyond the genesis of the draft GSP. And so we're not putting anything in there that's kind of new, other than just kind of documenting what's been happening and putting things in context. And so I have a few slides today. I'm just going to present, some of a few tables and figures and some things that are going to be in chapter 3, and going to present that. And of course, the TAC has seen early versions and provided comment, and there's still comment out there that I'm going to incorporate into a version that hopefully will go before the West Turlock Subbasin and East Turlock Subbasin GSA boards in a couple weeks, if that's the route that this group advises. So let's move on. I have about 12 slides here. It shouldn't be that long. So I think first off, it's important and it's wise to take a look and say, what do the GSP regulations say about how outreach and notice and communication needs to be memorialized in a GSP, or at the very least a GSP that's deemed or approved by the department. And you see in red, I'm not going to read through all of them, but you see in the red bolding there, the types of things that the GSP regulations require of communication in the GSP. And I'll point out the 4 bullets under D, that the communication section of the GSP has to talk about the decision-making process of the agency or agencies, how the public was engaged, and how that input was used in the GSP prior to adoption, how the agency encourages, or agencies encourage, the active involvement of various social, cultural, and economic interests, and then also how the public's going to be informed about the plan implementation. So very general framework thus far in the regulations that are there. Of course, there have been a lot of guidance documents issued by the department and other agencies as well, and we've documented the ones that we've taken a look at in the draft chapter as well, and use them for best practices. And so that's a quick run through of the regulations. Of course, then, well, what does the law say? What did SGMA actually call for? And so I'm not expecting everybody to take a look at this table that's listed in the draft chapter, but it's really kind of the implementation of, we wanted to document in the chapter, what is the statutory requirement in the water code under SGMA for various portions of GSA creation, GSP development, GSP adoption, and then entirely through SGMA implementation. And so we developed this table to basically have a column that talks about the statutory requirement for stakeholder engagement, and then a far right column where we outline the types of things that we feel meet the letter of that law or the spirit of that law as far as compliance. So that's something that you could look forward to seeing in chapter 3. I want to talk a little bit about the drafting team. It was a group effort that's taken many years of work, but obviously the chapter has been compiled recently, kind of showing all the documentation for that work. But obviously Todd Groundwater, the GSP consultant, was huge in the creation of the draft chapter. We had a ad hoc communications committee for the Turlock Subbasin that's met on an as needed basis over the past 2 years or so, and that's consisting of a kind of a little bit of a rotating group of volunteering members of these two bodies throughout the subbasin. There's been engagement from the east and the west Turlock Subbasin GSA tax, and then we had some and continue to still have some help through Sac State's College of Continuing Education, through some DWR funding that we received early on, but also not in coincidental circumstances that Sac State was also hired on as a sub-consultant of the Todd Groundwater consulting team for the GSP. So they were working on chapter 3, and the plan was for them to do that, and they have. And so they've been part of the team. And then also we've been working through some other FSS funding we've received through the Department of Water Resources. We've been working with Stantec Consulting on a lot of the things that are going to be basically in the technical appendix. They've been working with us on some GSP response to comment and a framework that we're going to be using as we respond to comments that are made on the GSP. That will make its way into our appendix. They've been working for us on some call logs related to our request to the Native American Heritage Commission to get a listing of sacred lands or interested other tribal stakeholders that would be in the subbasin. And of course, I think I've reported on that in the past. That came back negative for our subbasin, but there was a listing of a whole bunch of tribes, and not in an immediate region, but in the Central Valley and the San Joaquin Valley, and even the Sac Valley, where we've worked to call and attempt to see if there's any interest in historical properties in this area. And so we have call logs for that are going to make their way in the appendix. And then there's a stakeholder gap assessment, taking a look at our interested parties list that Stantec was working on, and they're going to get us results on that as well. And so those are things that they're working on. They're going to make their way into the appendix. So that was the drafting team. What's the drafting process been like? Todd Groundwater worked with Sacramento State and the ad hoc committee and developed a framework and outline to fit in of what was required and what needed to be into chapter 3 as far as notice and communication. Then, Sacramento State developed some of the narrative early on based on a lot of existing language we had back from 2017, 2018, when Sacramento State worked with us to develop a working communications plan for Turlock Subbasin outreach. And so that developed, and then the ad hoc committee took a look around and made some refinements and additions to that narrative and added a few extra tables and a few things in there based on their local experience. And then we asked for comments a week or so ago from based on an administrative draft from the 2 technical advisory committees, and received some comments and continue to make those comments into another version. And we're updating everybody today on some of the things that are generally in the GSP for chapter 3. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about those things in a second. And then, of course, if all goes according to plan, we're looking as part of the previous two chapters, chapters 8 and 9 that were presented on, of presenting chapter 3 as well to the GSP boards on November 15th in a special joint meeting for authorization for chapter 3 to be released for public comment and to have a public comment period for that. So that's been our process. Generally, here's the 5-section contents, or at least the current section headings we have. I highlight the second bullet in bold red. The biggest section is the opportunities for engagement and input, and where we outline all the different ways we've sought public engagement and input and all the different resources we've used. And then, of course, you see other items that will be listed in chapter 3 as well. We're going to have a few appendices, actually a lot. There may be more on top of this, but this is a listing of things that won't make their way into the draft chapter itself. But some of these are lengthy documents that we will have, or call logs or spreadsheets that we will have at the end of the entire GSP as well, that will be referenced in chapter 3. And so you see, the biggest ones will probably be the communications plan, which is a multi-page document, and then our list of meetings spreadsheet and other items that outline all the things that we've done thus far. So there may be more things added to this list of appendices. There's still going to be some ongoing work that's going to need to be done to the chapter as it gets updated. Namely, yes, we're going to send this out for public comment, but we're going to have some areas that are going to be highlighted for outreach metrics, because we're still going to be performing outreach. We're still going to be conducting meetings. We're still going to be sending emails. We're still going to be sending social media posts and posting videos. So there's a lot of metrics in there that they're going to be highlighted that we're going to need to update prior to going to the GSA boards for approval for the GSP to be adopted later on at the turn of this year or the beginning of next year, when that comes before the boards. So it's going to be it's not going to be necessarily complete to that extent. And there's a few pieces like the call logs from the Native American Heritage Commission filing that we got, the stakeholder gap analysis. There's a timeline of meetings I'll show you in a minute. It's really cool looking, and it's a good description of all the meetings that we've held thus far. But we have to fill that out and finish that out all the way through 2021. So that will be updated. We still have to work, obviously. We're getting public comments on all the sections, not just chapter 3 when that gets released, but we're going to have in the appendix our response to comments and our matrix for how we responded to those comments and coded those comments and how those were responded to. So that's still getting worked on. And then, of course, we're still sending emails. We have distribution reports that can show metrics for how many emails we've sent, how they've been, what percentage of them have been opened, what percentage of links have been clicked, and all that stuff still being worked on right now. So one of the tables that's going to be in the chapter 3 is a basic table that shows the public comment periods. You see there's still a little bit to be filled out with a reference chapter, if indeed that's a chapter or it's its own piece. But I've inserted in, kind of anticipating this November 15th date for chapter 3, and then chapter 6 and 7. Chapters 8 and 9 going before the 2 GSA boards. And so this is the example of the type of column that shows how long the review periods have been for various chapters. And there's also a note down there noting that we still have every chapter listed on our website and is still technically available for comment, even though we have requested comments by a certain date, as you see there in that third column there. And so while public comment periods were 55 days, 30 days, and on and down that last column, that's just when we requested them so that we can hopefully make changes into the GSP as quick as possible. But all those chapters still remain open if anybody still is looking for a chance to comment. So we welcome that. This is what I was mentioning earlier. This is a very shortened form, for example purposes only, of what will be figure 3.2 of the GSP in chapter 3. And it's really a dot listing of all color-coded based on all the different meetings that have been held really since 2017. You see a listing here of 2 years worth, or 24 months, from 2017 and 2018. We're actively working for 2019, 2020, and then 2021 to have all these dots filled in. And it's a really good pictorial presentation of all the different public meetings and workshops and other meetings that have been held. And so that's a nice little visual touch to the chapter that we're working on. We want to try and make it not too text heavy and have a lot of visuals. I'm not expecting everybody to take a look at this list here. I actually have a highlights of this list on my next slide, but this is an example of a table that's going to kind of list all the different outreach methods that we use to engage stakeholders. And you see a listing too of what will be in many of the highlights that will be there as we're trying to update it prior to adoption. And so it's just a listing of some of our outreach methods that we've used since 2017. And I kind of highlight them here in this next slide. We've had, through August of 2021, I counted around 180 meetings. I was trying to do a quick count during this meeting. Now that we're here at the beginning of November, we're I think just north of 200 plus meetings that have been held on the GSP thus far. And so, we're going to document all of those in the GSP. And then our website has been a huge, other than public meetings, our website's been a huge way we communicate both with customers, both to customers and get input from customers. And so some of the numbers that are currently in the GSP, even though I know they've grown since then, but we've thousands of visits to the site, and around 3,400 unique visitors. We've used there's a picture to the right here of a sample email. It's actually the email promoting today's meeting that we're on right now. But we sent over 126 separate email notifications with notices for meetings or various newsletter pieces to our interested party list, which is now north of 370 subscribers. And people could still sign up to this day on our website to our email list. Many digital resources and handouts. We have a 5-minute Sigma 101 video, which has been in English and Spanish, which has been received really well, and fact sheets and bill inserts and even materials we've received from the counties related to work they've been doing on resources and helping people to report to the state need dry wells or get assistance. We have all that available on our resources page. And then we've used social media a lot as well. Meetings like this, we post on our YouTube channel. We have 70 plus videos up there. We post almost everything we can on Twitter and Facebook. And so those are really the main communication tools that we're going to highlight through a number of different charts and tables and narrative and text in the draft chapter 3. Other items that you'll see in there, obviously you see a picture here of that's we're working to update on our governance structure that's in there. We have to describe how decisions have been made, and we'll do that in a narrative fashion, and also with this photo here, this picture. We talk about our logo and branding efforts, which was new for us back in the time when we did that back in 2018. We talk a little bit about our role in working with a 15-week-long Water Leadership Institute that had a lot of local participants. And we talk about tribal stakeholder engagement and disadvantaged areas in the plan area as well. And I think that may be my last slide. But that was really just a quick drive-through of all the kind of highlighted information that we have in the GSP for Chapter 3. And what is to be expected. We'll present on this if this group is agreeable to getting this advised to the GSA boards for the 15th of this month. Then we'll present an updated presentation to them and look to release it to the public for comments. And so with that being said, I now will look to see if there are any questions. I do see Rhett has raised his hand. So Rhett, go ahead. I'll lower your hand. Feel free and ask your question.
Yeah, Herb, first of all, you're doing a great job. I appreciate all the emails that you've sent out notifying us of meetings, and it's very helpful. So the following comments are not necessarily criticisms. It's more areas of improvement, and I know it's coming. So on the Twitter, since I am a user of Twitter, that if it could be more up to date would be handy. And I know there's people that use Facebook, and there's all kinds of social media avenues. So that's just, if I get to ask, I would ask for more, like the meeting notices could go out on Twitter and say, hey, there's a meeting coming up tomorrow. Adding to that, what's really handy, and it's handier the moment that you notice a meeting, is the meeting materials, if they were available. And I know you're working on them to the last minute because there's a lot going on, and that's good to have up-to-date stuff. But if a link, in an ideal world, if the meeting notice went out and a link to the materials, not just the agenda, that's great. I love the agenda, but also the materials, so we can go through the slides and kind of be prepared with, the detailed question that we might come up with in the meeting. And other than that, I would subscribe to Turlock Groundwater as, I don't like to be put into a category. I'm a farmer in the Turlock Irrigation District. I have a domestic well. I raised my family in the city of Turlock, and we paid a lot of city water bills up until just a few months ago because we sold that house. But it's very expensive for people in the city to access water because the cities are trying to do their job and be sustainable. And then out in the country, we're worried about the economics of raising a crop and paying for all the capital that we've invested. But at the same time, we've got to drink water. We've got to have steady supply of water for the house out here. And I'm not the only one in that boat. There's a lot of people that are doing the same thing. And so I guess I have an appreciation, and I kind of speak on behalf of just, general fairness and access to water. And I appreciate the work you're doing. You guys are doing a good job. Thank you.
Thanks, Rhett. Yeah, definitely good comments. We definitely, there's some things that we can do here, given along the lines of the three things you mentioned in improvements, and we've definitely worked toward that. So I definitely appreciate those. Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments related to draft chapter 3 of the GSP, at least as far as the types of things that are going to go in it and anything related to that?
Herb, what we got you, maybe just mention some of the outreach you're looking to do over the next month or two as we start going through the adoption process here and public review process.
Yeah, definitely. So, one of the things we're looking to do, and this might even kind of double a little bit for some of the things that I would mention in the public outreach section of the agenda, but a lot of it crosses over, and all this is going to get documented in chapter 3. One of the things we're looking forward to doing with some of the FSS funding we have in working with Stantec Consulting is we're working on a GSP adoption toolkit, which really, the materials can be used for anybody for general information, but we're really aiming at getting this information out in the next 30 days or so to the member agencies of the GSAs, those who sit here on the technical advisory committees. And some of the things that we're looking to have in there is there could be an infographic that describes the process, so that there's talking points, perhaps a draft resolution for boards or councils, as far as a resolution supporting the work we're doing. Of course, the GSAs themselves have representatives from the member agencies, and that's how the vote on the adoption of the GSP will occur. But it's always nice to have support from cities and counties, or from boards and elected boards, elected councils. That's always nice to have on hand. And so resolutions probably will be made available in a template format. There would be maybe a staff report for such a resolution. We're looking at potentially having a bill insert that could be made available to agencies as well that announces that the GSP adoption date is nearing, when that date gets taken care of. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that process later today too. But a toolkit for member agencies to basically empower them to be kind of almost turnkey to go to their councils and boards. And so members here on this call might be interested in that. We're also looking to have continue our groundwater lunch hours, our groundwater office hours series. We've held, I think, 8 now, and we have another one planned for November 18th, talking about these chapters that were mentioned today, and to go through in a little bit of an informal setting and talk about those. And so that's coming up. We recently held our groundwater office hours from on chapters 6 and 7. And that was held, and I just posted the video of that today, so that's available on our website as well. And then I think that might be it. There's one other thing. We're still trying to pin down a meeting with the community of Delhi. We're working with Leadership Council on getting into that community and being able to present to them where we're at in the GSP process, how they could be involved. And also trying to get their unique insights from their community views and their interests in safe drinking water. And so we're working on getting that going as well. And there's lots of discussion on that. I think, Michael, unless there's an item I'm missing, that might be it for an update. I'm going to check the chat now just to see.
Herb, I also offered to put together a presentation to give to my council, and I'm willing to share that with others. Hopefully next week I can send it to you.
Yeah, that'd be perfect, Karen. Thank you.
Also, I wanted to mention, I think I've made folks on the ad hoc group aware that the East Side is developing some outreach materials. We have a draft FAQ that's currently in the final stages of review, and a fact sheet regarding adaptive management of demand reduction. And we're currently planning a series of workshops on the East Side. So, stand by for more information on all those things.
Perfect. And I think I just changed you should be seeing the website maybe. Can you guys see that up there on your screen?
Yeah.
Is that what it's showing? Just real quick, one thing that's of value, Karen, thanks for reminding me of that. Ways to find the GSP chapters on the website. This is the turlockgroundwater.org website. If you just click the GSP, it will take you to our page, and all you need to do is scroll down, and you have a listing of all the chapters here that are available for download. Sometimes it's like not intuitive to go to the bottom of the page and find all the information, but we do have a jump link here that says view draft GSP chapters that will take you there as well. And so that is also there. And then one thing I also noticed too, by way of one of our TAC members mentioned that I say there's videos online, and sometimes it's not necessarily the most intuitive thing, the way we've designed our website. But I will mention, if you come to this calendar view that we have here, I'm looking over on my other screen, so that's why I'm not looking in the camera. But if you look over to this calendar view here, and you go to a meeting that's been held in the past, right? So if I were to go to this joint meeting of the GSAs, there's no video here as you hover over it, but if you click into that meeting, you'll notice that there is a link to a YouTube video. And so every meeting that we've had on Zoom, we've found a way to memorialize that and document it for the record. And so all those meetings, if you want to go back and watch hours of video related to our groundwater work and our outreach, that is available there too. So I just want to do that quick run through since I had some time of what we have available on the website and how to get to the GSP and download it, as also how to see past meetings. I think that is it. Are there any potential other questions or comments related to this item? And if not, I don't have the wording here for a motion, but I would look to Michael to maybe expedite that. I'll leave it at that for now.
All right, thank you, Herb. I appreciate your work and your team on this stuff. It's not easy, and then the pandemic hit, and we worried how we're going to adapt. We we definitely did adapt, and I think some of these online meetings have really helped us actually get more outreach than we anticipated when we started. So thank you so much for that. So as Herb mentioned, this is an action item recommending that this chapter be included in the GSP for public review and comment. So with that, I take a motion to approve the updates to the draft communication outreach chapter and recommend that chapter be included in the draft groundwater sustainability plan. Anybody like to make a motion?
I'll motion, Michael.
Thank you, Leandro. So Leandro from Delhi made the motion. A second.
Second from Curtis.
Second from Curtis at Hillmar. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion stands approved. Over to you, Sarah, for East Turlock GSA.
Thank you. So I would look for a motion from East Turlock to move chapter 3 forward to the full board on the 15th.
Move approval. No, second then?
Okay, let's see. Who said the first? Was that Matt
Yeah.
or Dennis?
Yeah.
Matt, great, thank you. And Walt made the second. Do a
Yeah.
roll call vote. Matt Beeman,
Yes.
Walt Ward,
Yes.
Lacey McBride,
Yes.
and Dennis Yatsua,
Yes.
and Sarah Wolf, yes. So motion carries from East Side.
Thank you so much, everybody. That ends our action items for today. Finishing up with item number 7, Sigma related updates. This is just for non-agendized items, general updates. Anything heard more on communication and outreach?
No, Michael, nothing additionally from me. Just encouraging people to sign up for our emails, visit us on social media, go to the GSP page, and then just keep looking forward. You'll hear from us through one of those methods or from a meeting on this GSP outreach toolkit we're working on. So we're going to try and work pretty fast on it, just keep your ears peeled for that as all this stuff continues to unfold pretty quickly.
Sounds great. So with that, I'll hand over to Debbie for an update on the GSP schedule and on our grants.
Thank you, Michael. I'm going to try to share the screen. Hopefully this works. Can you see this presentation?
It's coming up. Yep.
Yay. Okay. So just really short, but I thought it would be helpful to have, something that you can look at while I was talking about it. We have some hard dates that we've been able to work through and find times for the joint GSA meetings to work through this process. And so I wanted everyone to be aware of those and the plan moving forward. As you all know, we're required to adopt and submit the GSP to the Department of Water Resources by January 31st, 2022. So that date is coming up quickly. As we've talked about in a couple of different items, we're planning on releasing the last 3 chapters and have a review with the board, and the board would take action hopefully to release those last 3 chapters to the public for review on November 15th. So at that point, we'll have a complete draft of the GSP that will be available for review from the public. And I think that's important because we didn't hear from some of our stakeholders that it was important for them to be able to cross-reference and look through the different chapters as they were reviewing them. So this provides that opportunity, at least for a short period of time. We are under a limited time frame, but it's also important to know that in addition to the GSA's public review process, there's another public review process that will be coming after the GSP is adopted and submitted to DWR. And so there's additional opportunity to provide comment. Also, on the 15th, we're planning on setting a hearing date and directing the technical advisory committees to work to publish the hearing notices and that sort of thing, so that we can be moving through that process as we're preparing to adopt the plan. We would also be taking action to assign a plan manager. And we've talked about that earlier today. So I also wanted to make the public aware that there is likely to be some errata sheets to some of the chapters as we continue to fill in blanks and those types of things for the chapters. There is one that's posted right now for chapter 5, and really it was a typo that needed to be corrected. So there's a lot of text within each of those chapters, and it's inevitable that there will be a few things here and there that we'll need to correct. And so that's what those errata sheets are, and they will be posted with each of the chapters. So you'll see what the proposed changes are to the text, if there are any. Then let's see, outreach opportunities are being developed. I think we've talked about that already. Herb provided some information earlier, and there was additional comments from Mike Titsa on the projects that are being worked on the east side as well. There is a meeting, an additional meeting that's planned for December 15th. It'll be another joint GSA meeting, and this will provide an opportunity for an overall review, of the GSP, and opportunity for the the public to provide some comments. We'll also be reviewing the comments that have been received to date, and the response process and where we are with that. On December 15th, that will be 30 days after the release of the final chapters. There may be some additional comments that are still coming in at that point in time. So the review probably will not be of all possible comments that have been received, but it's an opportunity for people to understand what the comments are, and as well as the board to understand what the comments are, and to provide additional comments should they wish to. And then the hearing date is planned for January 6th. Again, it would be a joint GSA meeting. We would hold the hearing. There would be opportunity to provide comments, and then the board could consider those comments, or excuse me, boards would consider the comments, and then they would have an opportunity following the hearing to consider adopting the plan. We're hopeful that that will occur so that it will enable us to begin the process of importing all of the necessary information into the DWR portal. As I understand that, that's not an easy process, and it includes significant amounts of data and information in addition to the document itself, the GSP, that the public will be reviewing over the next 30 days or so. So that's what I had. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions for Debbie on her update? Okay, hearing none. Anything else from East Turlock folks? Any updates? Sarah, anything to add?
Nothing, no.
Okay.
Well, the end is in sight.
Yes, it certainly is. This is a big milestone. So thanks everybody. Everybody's been working very hard over the last couple of weeks. So I do appreciate all your hard work and efforts to get this closer to the finish line. So as you saw, we have a joint board meeting. So the two agency boards will meet on November 15th to hopefully release the 3 chapters we discussed today to the public. And then our next technical advisory committee meeting is November 18th. And Karen Morgan, if you could fill in for me that day, I would appreciate it, because I won't be here.
Sure.
Okay. Got it, Karen? Perfect.
I got it.
Thank you. Okay, so with that, I'll take a motion for adjournment from the West Turlock GSA Technical Advisory Committee.
Excuse me, Michael, sorry to interrupt.
Hi, Jessica.
Jesse. I'm just wondering if we skipped over grants. on the segment-related update, or if there was nothing to report for there.
Debbie had nothing to report, but go ahead, Debbie.
Sure. Sorry about that. I was focused on the schedule today. But yes, we've been doing work to move the grant. The one grant is the GSP, and so and development of the GSP. The second grant includes 3 different projects. One is installation of some monitoring wells. We are still waiting for the final permit. Apparently, I think I reported at the last meeting that there was a check that got lost in the mail, literally. And so I'm working between the county and the consultant to try to find it or to reissue it. And so as a result, we are likely going to need to extend the contract. And so I have a meeting tomorrow with our purchasing department to work on that. Construction should begin likely in December now. So that's just the reality of the situation, and we're moving forward with that. There's also the development of the groundwater recharge assessment tool. They are close. There have been some coordination between both the East Turlock Subbasin GSA and the West Turlock Subbasin GSA on the data and how it's looking to make sure that everything looks right. For the West Turlock, we had them add in some additional lands that appeared to not be included in one of the crop surveys from the county. There were some missing parcels that are being added back in that give us options to consider more acreage on the West Turlock areas. And so that is being done. And then I think it's going to be rolled out. So there should be more information on that soon. And then lastly, there is the PEIR process. We had our first ad hoc meeting with the consultant team earlier this week. And the plan is to bring that information and schedule to the TAC on November 18th. So you'll get a presentation from our consultants on the process and the schedule, because it's a relatively tight time frame. We're getting used to all of those. And so we want everyone to be aware of when and how we're going to move through the process, and timelines for commenting on the internal documents so that we can get them out to the public for their review and meet the deadlines for the grant requirements. So I hope that helps. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Debbie. Does that help, Jessica?
That's great. Thanks a bunch. No questions from here.
Thank you.
All right. So back to number 9, motion for adjournment for the West Turlock first. Go on, motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Curtis, motion, a second.
I will second, Michael.
Leandro seconded. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are adjourned. Sarah, over to you.
All right, can I get a first to adjourn?
Move adjourn.
That was Walt, I think, in a second.
Dennis.
Dennis,
I'll
thank
second.
you. And I'll do a quick roll call. Walt,
Yeah.
Dennis,
Yes.
Lacey.
Yes.
Matt,
Yes.
and myself, yes, we are adjourned as well.
Okay, thanks everybody. See you on the 15th and then the 18th.